It was the year 1983, and the world was closer to the end than anyone ever knew. It wasn't a bomb, it wasn't an army, it was a single man holding a telephone with a trembling hand. His name was Stanislav Petrov, and that night he received an order no human being should ever have to receive. The monitors in front of him began flashing red, and the system reported that American nuclear missiles were on their way. 5 missiles. The system said 5 nuclear missiles were crossing the ocean toward the Soviet Union. The protocol was clear. He had minutes to report to the Kremlin and trigger a devastating response. But something inside him hesitated, and that hesitation would change the fate of 5 billion people. To understand what happened in that room, we need to go back to the moment when the world began to unravel. The year 1983 was the most tense of the Cold War, more than the Cuban Missile Crisis, more than anything before it. Reagan had called the Soviet Union the evil empire, and the Soviets believed he was planning a preemptive strike. That September, a South Korean passenger plane was shot down by Soviet fighter jets, and the world nearly collapsed. 269 people died, and the temperature between the two superpowers reached a boiling point. It was in this climate of absolute paranoia that Stanislav Petrov began his shift at the Serpukhov 15 bunker. The bunker was located 250 kilometers from Moscow, buried beneath meters of earth and secrecy. Inside, men monitored the sky using satellites capable of detecting the heat signature of a missile launch from the other side of the planet. It was the invisible front line of the Cold War, not trenches but screens, algorithms, and impossible decisions. Petrov was not just an operator. He was the man responsible for interpreting the data and deciding whether it was real. At 12:15 a.m. on September 26, 1983, the alarm sounded for the first time. 1 missile. The system indicated a single American nuclear missile on an impact trajectory. Petrov looked at the screen, and his first thought was that it made no sense at all. Why would the Americans launch only 1 missile? A real nuclear attack would come in the hundreds, not just 1. But before he could finish that line of reasoning, the alarm sounded again. Then once more. 5 missiles. The system now showed 5 nuclear missiles crossing the Atlantic toward the Soviet Union. The alert level rose to maximum, and everyone in the room looked at Petrov. A red telephone sat in front of him. On the other end of the line would be the duty general at the Kremlin. If he made the call, the Soviets would launch their own missiles before the American ones arrived. That was the protocol. 1 call from Petrov could kill 300 million people within the next few hours. And if he didn't call, and the missiles were real, the Soviet Union would be destroyed without any response at all. Petrov was trapped between 2 apocalypses, and the clock kept ticking. No training in the world could prepare someone for that specific moment. Soviet regulations were absolute. Any level 5 alarm required immediate notification to the Kremlin. But Petrov noticed something no algorithm had accounted for. The system was too new to be trusted. The early warning satellite had been installed only a few months earlier, and Petrov knew the testing phase was not yet complete. The system might have mistaken sunlight reflecting off clouds for the heat signature of a missile launch. It was a hypothesis, just a hypothesis, against the weight of a protocol that had existed for decades. Petrov looked at his colleagues. They were all waiting. The silence in the room felt physical, like pressure against the chest. In that instant, Stanislav Petrov made one of the most consequential decisions in human history. He chose not to call. He decided the system was wrong. For 23 minutes, the longest of his life, he waited to find out whether he had been wrong. 23 minutes. Long enough for real missiles to cross the ocean and strike Moscow. If Petrov had been wrong, Moscow would have been in flames at that very moment. But time passed, and no explosion came. The system had failed. The satellite had mistaken sunlight reflecting off high-altitude clouds for the heat signature of missile propulsion. It was a software error. A specific angle of the sun hitting a specific type of cloud. That nearly ended human civilization. But Petrov's story did not end with that relief. What came next was just as astonishing. Instead of being celebrated as a hero, Petrov was reprimanded. His report had been filled out incorrectly during the crisis. His superiors were furious, not about the system's failure, but about the way Petrov had documented the incident. He received a formal reprimand and was quietly removed from his post a few months later. The man who saved the world was sent home in silence, as if nothing had happened. For years, the incident remained classified as a state secret. No one outside a small inner circle even knew it had occurred. Petrov returned to his ordinary life. His wife was ill. Money was tight. Heroism does not pay the bills. The world moved on, completely unaware that it had been minutes away from the end. Then something unexpected happened. The Soviet Union collapsed, and classified archives began to open. In 1998, 15 years later, a former Russian official revealed the incident to the world for the first time. Humanity finally learned that a single man, inside a bunker, had kept his finger away from the button. Petrov was found living in a modest apartment on the outskirts of Moscow. He had tried to forget the incident, or perhaps he truly had. When asked whether he considered himself a hero, Petrov gave a response that would echo through history. He said he had simply done his job, and that if he had been wrong, there would have been no one left to know. What few people realize is that 1983 was not the only time the world teetered on the edge. There was another crisis, one that came shortly after. In November 1983, just 6 weeks after Petrov's incident, NATO conducted a military exercise called Able Archer 83. It was a simulation, but the Soviets were not sure whether it was merely a drill or the beginning of a real attack. History sometimes survives not because systems are perfect, but because imperfect humans hesitate at precisely the right moment. The Cold War was not just a clash of ideologies, it was a long chain of near misses, misunderstandings, and fragile decisions balanced on human intuition. The Soviet military was placed on maximum alert. Nuclear-armed fighter jets were put on immediate takeoff readiness. The world was, once again, standing at the edge of the abyss, and this time there were 2 triggers ready to be pulled. Able Archer lasted 11 days. For 11 days, humanity lived on a razor's edge without knowing it. When the exercise ended and the Soviets realized it had truly been a simulation, the relief was immense. But the world never knew it had been one wrong decision away from destruction, twice in the same year. What these events reveal is something unsettling. Our survival depended on human instinct, not on systems. The systems said to strike, the humans hesitated, and that hesitation saved us. Today, early warning systems are far more sophisticated, but the logic of mutual destruction remains exactly the same. 9 countries possess nuclear weapons. Together, they hold enough firepower to destroy civilization many times over, and yet, the final decision still passes through a human being, with all their fears, fatigue, and doubt. Stanislav Petrov died in May 2017, in the same modest apartment where he had lived since leaving the military, in Moscow. History is often told through grand speeches and massive battles. But sometimes it turns on something quieter, a pause, a doubt, a refusal to follow the script written by machines. Civilization has survived not because we eliminated error, but because once in a while, someone chooses to question it. He never received a medal. He never won an award from the Russian government. He was recognized only by the outside world. In 2013, he received an award from an Association of United Nations Citizens, 30 years after having saved the world. When asked what went through his mind during those 23 minutes of waiting, he said he thought he might be making the greatest mistake in history, and that someone had to decide. That is the nature of real responsibility, not certainty, but uncertainty burdened with unimaginable consequences. Every generation believes it is more rational, better prepared, less prone to catastrophic error than the one before. But the systems of 1983 were also considered the most advanced in history at that time. The question is not whether the next Petrov will exist. The question is whether he will have enough time to hesitate. In a world where hypersonic missiles allow only minutes of warning, the window for human hesitation is shrinking. In 1983, there were 23 minutes to think. Today, that time may be 5 or 6 minutes. And in a world where artificial intelligence systems increasingly assist in military decision-making at near-instant speed, the margin for human doubt grows thinner still. The paradox is unsettling. The faster our technology becomes, the slower our wisdom needs to be. Civilization may yet depend on that fragile pause, the space between signal and response, where a human being chooses not to let the machine finish the sentence. Petrov's story is not a story of the past. It is a mirror pointed directly at the present. Every day that passes without nuclear catastrophe is not proof that the system works. It is proof that we have been lucky. And luck, by definition, is the one resource that inevitably runs out. Stanislav Petrov's legacy is this: the proof that the end of the world was once an individual choice, and that the end did not come because one man in a bunker, in a fraction of a second, chose to doubt a machine. Doubt the machines. Doubt the systems, and remember the man the world forgot, and because of that, still exists.